My unfaithful wife was always too busy to talk, constantly feeding me excuses, so I went to court to finally end this. Sup Reddit, my name is Nathan, and I'm 29 years old. I've been living in Miami for the past few years now, and I have to say it's been treating me well. I work as a marketing consultant for a big company, pulling in decent money that lets me afford a nice apartment and drive an expensive car. I've been married to Victoria for almost 10 years now, and honestly, I thought I had the perfect life mapped out. It was a Tuesday in September, and Miami was living up to its reputation, hot as hell, with the air hanging heavy like a wet blanket draped over the entire city. I had just gotten back from a client meeting on the south side of town, and I was completely exhausted. The Florida sun had left me sunburned and ready to crash for the evening. All I wanted was to get home, maybe grab a cold beer, and decompress from what had been a particularly draining day. When I walked into our house, still carrying my briefcase, I immediately noticed something different. There was a scent in the air that wasn't familiar. It wasn't Victoria's usual vanilla candles that she loved to burn throughout the house. This was jasmine, sweet and intimate, someone else's scent entirely. Victoria had always been particular about her fragrances, usually sticking to coconut or citrus-based stuff that gave the house a fresh, clean smell. This jasmine was different, more personal, more intimate in a way that made my stomach twist slightly. I made my way into the kitchen, still trying to process what felt off about the atmosphere. That's when I saw her phone sitting there on our granite counter, just sitting there like it belonged to a stranger. The screen was lit up and unlocked, which was unusual since Victoria was normally very protective of her privacy. But what really stopped me in my tracks was the message sitting wide open on the screen, displayed like a slap across the face. Same time tomorrow. Miss you already, followed by a heart emoji. The message had no name attached to it, just a number I didn't recognize. But what really hit me was the heart emoji. Victoria doesn't use heart emojis with me. She hasn't in years. Our text conversations had devolved into the mundane logistics of married life. Grocery lists, utility bills, pick up milk, and I'll be home late messages. Nothing romantic, nothing sweet, and certainly nothing with heart emojis. I stood there staring at that glowing screen, my hands refusing to move, my breath staying steady, even though my brain felt like it had just hit black ice. I was sliding into some place I didn't recognize, some territory I had never imagined I'd find myself in. I didn't touch the phone, didn't make a sound, just stood there in our kitchen until the screen finally went dark, like the message had never existed at all. That's when I heard her voice drifting down from upstairs, singing something soft and melodic. I recognized the tune immediately. It was from that playlist she had made last winter, the one she called Moonlight Sessions. She only played those songs when she thought she was completely alone in the house. Or apparently, as I was beginning to realize, when she wasn't alone at all. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was humming those intimate melodies while I stood downstairs discovering her secret. I forced myself to move, walking upstairs with deliberate slowness. Each step felt heavier than the last, like I was climbing towards some inevitable revelation that I wasn't sure I was ready to face. When I reached the top of the stairs, I noticed the guest room door was cracked open slightly. Through the gap, I could see Victoria standing in front of the mirror, carefully twisting her hair into that fancy clip she only wore for special occasions. What really caught my attention was what she was wearing. The red silk nightgown that I had bought her for Valentine's Day 2 years ago. It was beautiful, expensive, and something I hadn't seen her wear in over a year. Seeing it now, watching her adjust it in the mirror while humming to herself, felt like a punch to the gut. She was barefoot, completely carefree, moving with a lightness that suggested nothing in the world was wrong. There was an energy about her that I hadn't seen in months, maybe even longer. I didn't go into the room. Instead, I turned and walked quietly to our bedroom, where I sat down heavily on the edge of our bed. My eyes fell on the framed photo from our trip to Key Largo that sat on the nightstand. Victoria wearing those designer sunglasses I'd bought her, holding a frozen margarita and smiling at me like I was the only man on earth. That photo had been taken just last year, but looking at it now, it felt like evidence from a completely different life. About 10 minutes later, Victoria walked into our bedroom with that same carefree energy. She leaned down and kissed the top of my head in what felt like a practiced gesture, then announced that she was going out for sushi. "Claire's picking me up," she said, dropping the name like she knew I wouldn't question it, like she was counting on me not to dig any deeper. She said it with such casual confidence that I realized this wasn't the first time she'd used Claire as her alibi. I didn't say a word in response. I just nodded and watched her gather her purse and keys with the efficiency of someone who had done this routine many times before. When I heard the front door click shut behind her, I waited a few moments before going back downstairs. The first thing I noticed was that her phone was gone from the granite counter, taken with her this time, probably because she realized she'd made a mistake leaving it behind earlier. That night, I found myself sitting alone in the dark, doing something I hadn't done in years. I opened a bottle of bourbon and poured myself 3 fingers neat. Not because I needed the alcohol to numb anything, but because I needed clarity. Sometimes, the sharp burn of good whiskey has a way of cutting through the fog in your mind, forcing you to see things as they really are rather than how you want them to be. I sat there staring at the glass like it might tell me something. Some piece of wisdom I didn't already know deep in my gut. Victoria came back late around midnight, tiptoeing through the house like she thought I was asleep. I could hear every careful step she took, the deliberate way she moved through our home trying not to wake me. Then came the sound of the shower running for what felt like an unusually long time, followed by the low thud of her bathrobe hitting the bathroom floor. Finally, I felt her slide into bed beside me without saying a word, settling in like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just spent the evening doing God knows what while lying to my face. But the moment that really sealed everything for me happened the next morning over coffee. Victoria looked me directly in the eye with that practiced composure she'd perfected over the years and said, "I think I'm going to take a solo trip next month. Just a weekend, to clear my head." I nodded like nothing was wrong, playing along with whatever game we were now playing. She smiled that perfectly rehearsed smile that I was beginning to recognize as completely hollow. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. As she was walking toward the door, coffee mug in hand, ready to start what I assumed would be another day of lies, she turned back to me and said, "Call me tomorrow." The words hung in the air between us, and I knew with absolute certainty that she wasn't talking to me. Those words, that phrase, it was something she'd said before, to someone else. She had just accidentally let her other conversation slip into our morning routine. She walked out the door after that, leaving me sitting at our kitchen table with the devastating realization that my wife was not only cheating on me, but had become so comfortable with her deception that she was mixing up her scripts. I didn't wait for the sun to set this time. I didn't sit around agonizing over what I'd discovered or trying to convince myself I'd misunderstood something. Instead, I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. That night was one of the longest of my life. I lay there next to Victoria, wide awake, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing. She was so calm, so secure in her sleep, completely at peace with herself and her choices. It made my skin crawl to realize that there's a unique kind of madness that seeps into your brain when the person lying next to you is the one actively tearing your life apart, and they sleep like a baby while you're drowning in the silence of your own bedroom. By morning, something inside me had calcified into a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't going to ask Victoria anything directly. I wasn't going to snoop around the house like some paranoid husband looking for evidence. I wasn't going to play detective in my own home, rifling through her things or following her around town. Instead, I was going to play dead. Let her believe I was still the same blind, trusting husband she thought she had married. The same quiet, too trusting fool who would never suspect his wife of living a double life. That was going to be the game now, and I was going to play it better than she ever expected. Victoria was already dressed when I made it downstairs that morning. She was wearing tight black jeans and red lipstick, the same jasmine perfume from the day before still lingering around her like a signature. She was humming that same tune I'd heard her singing upstairs, like she was trying to twist the knife just a little deeper, though I doubt she even realized she was doing it. "I'll be at the coffee shop all morning," she announced, grabbing her keys and finishing the last of her latte with practiced efficiency. "Claire's meeting me for brunch." She dropped Claire's name again, using it like a shield she thought would protect her from any questions I might have. I smiled like nothing had happened, like I was still the oblivious husband who took everything at face value. "Tell Claire I said hi," I replied, keeping my voice light and casual. That made her pause for just a second. I watched as a flicker of something crossed her face. Not guilt, because Victoria wasn't the type to feel guilty about anything. It was more like irritation, annoyance that I had even remembered the name of her supposed alibi. She nodded quickly and left, the door clicking shut behind her with the finality of a judge's gavel. I waited exactly 5 minutes to make sure she was really gone, then opened my laptop. The number from that text message was still burned into my brain like a brand. I cross-checked it with the bill from our shared phone plan, something I had access to because Victoria had never bothered to change the password. probably assuming I'd never think to look. What I found made my stomach drop. That number had called her 12 times in the past week alone. Never more than 6 minutes each call, always between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., just long enough for whispered conversations and goodbyes when she thought I was asleep. When I did a reverse search on the number, I wasn't surprised to find it was a burner phone, but the area code was local. Whoever this man was, he wasn't some long-distance emotional affair. He was right here in Miami, close enough to meet her whenever she wanted. That's when I decided to do something I never thought I'd do in my life. I called in a favor from an old college buddy who works in private security. He owed me a big one from a job I had landed him a few years back when he was struggling to find work in his field. I gave him the burner phone number and kept my request simple and direct. "Just give me a name," I said. Nothing more than that. It took him exactly 3 hours to get back to me with information that made everything click into place with sickening clarity. The name he gave me was Tyler Knox. At first, the name didn't ring any bells, but then my friend provided more details that made my blood run cold. Tyler was a personal trainer who worked at that new gym off Ocean Drive called Elite Fitness. He drove a white Dodge Charger that, according to my friend, I'd probably seen around the neighborhood. The moment he mentioned the car, everything came crashing into focus like a puzzle piece snapping into place. I had seen that white Charger before, parked in various spots around our area. But more importantly, it all connected to Victoria's sudden gym membership that she'd signed up for about 2 months ago. Her sudden obsession with fitness, those long workout sessions that left her sore and exhausted, somehow never lined up with the actual workouts she described when I asked about them. The new tan lines I'd noticed, the extra showers she'd been taking, the way she'd started caring about her appearance in ways she hadn't in years. I didn't even have to ask my friend if Tyler was married. I already knew he wasn't. This guy wasn't hiding anything from anyone. He was actively trying to replace me in Victoria's life. He wasn't some married man sneaking around behind his wife's back. He was a single guy who probably saw my wife as his next serious relationship, completely available and ready to step into the role I was unknowingly being pushed out of. That afternoon, I made a decision that I knew would either give me the closure I needed or destroy what was left of my sanity. I decided to follow her. I know it sounds pathetic, and under normal circumstances, I would never stoop to that level. But you have to understand, I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed that last ounce of doubt ripped out of my chest like pulling a bad tooth. I needed undeniable proof so that when I made my next move, I could do it with complete certainty and no regrets. I watched her pull into a strip mall parking lot that was 2 blocks away from the coffee shop where she claimed she was going to spend her morning. But she didn't go inside the cafe like she'd told me. Instead, she walked around to the back of the building and disappeared through a side door that I assumed led to apartments above the commercial spaces. 15 minutes later, Tyler came out of that same door, shirtless and grinning like he'd just won the lottery. I didn't move from my car. I just sat there with the windows up and the air conditioning blasting, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. 48 minutes later, she came back out of that same door. Her hair was up, she was wearing the same clothes, but there was a completely different energy radiating from her. She was glowing like a neon sign, practically floating as she walked back to her car. That night, when Victoria walked through our front door, I was standing in the kitchen chopping vegetables for stir-fry. I was calm, methodical, moving with the deliberate precision of a man on death row, cooking his final meal. Every cut was clean, every movement controlled, because I knew this would be one of the last normal moments we'd ever share as husband and wife. She leaned against the refrigerator and looked at me with what seemed like genuine surprise. "You're cooking? Wow, should I open some wine?" There was something almost nostalgic in her voice, like she was remembering a version of our marriage from years ago when I used to cook for us regularly. I looked up from the cutting board, meeting her eyes with steady composure. "Sure, open the Merlot," I said, keeping my voice level and casual. She smiled. A real smile this time, not the practiced one I'd been seeing lately, and poured 2 glasses of wine from the bottle we'd been saving for a special occasion. She handed me one, and for a moment, it almost felt like we were just a normal married couple having a quiet evening at home. Then she said it again, the exact same words as yesterday, delivered with the same casual confidence. "Call me tomorrow." I took the wine glass from her hand, holding it perfectly steady despite the storm raging inside my chest. I looked her straight in the eye, letting the weight of the moment settle between us before I spoke. "I already did," I said. Victoria froze for just a heartbeat, her smile faltering as confusion flickered across her face. Then she laughed, but it was forced now, brittle around the edges like glass about to shatter. "Huh?" she said, trying to play it off like she hadn't heard me correctly. But her eyes had already changed. I could see the wheels turning behind them, trying to figure out what I meant, how much I knew, and how she was going to handle whatever was coming next. I didn't blink, didn't smile, didn't fidget. I just held her gaze and let the weight of those 4 words settle into the air between us like thick smoke. "I already did," I repeated, quieter this time, like the sentence itself was sacred and deserved to be spoken with reverence. What came after that moment was like watching a building slowly collapse in reverse. Everything that had been carefully constructed between us was about to come undone, piece by piece, until nothing recognizable remained. Victoria's face didn't fall right away because she was too well trained for that kind of immediate reaction. She had layers built up over years of practice, reflexes that had been honed on creating excuses and managing situations exactly like this one. At first, she laughed again, but the sound was too sharp now, forced and brittle around the edges, like something that might shatter if you touched it wrong. "You're being weird," she said, turning back toward the counter like we hadn't just crossed some invisible fault line that would change everything between us forever. "What does that even mean? Called who?" I put the knife down on the cutting board, not slamming it, but with just enough force for the clink of steel against granite to cut through her words and make her pay attention. "I called my lawyer," I said, keeping my voice completely level. Now the smile finally cracked. Not all the way. She was still too controlled for a complete breakdown, but just enough for me to see the flicker, like a candle guttering before the flame dies completely. Her hand paused mid-reach for the wine bottle, and I watched her shoulders stiffen as the reality of what I'd just said started to sink in. "What are you talking about?" she asked, still trying to play dumb, still attempting to drag us back to the surface where she could pretend this was all some misunderstanding. "I followed you today," I said, my voice remaining steady and matter-of-fact. "You weren't at the coffee shop." Her breath caught shallow and quick just once, but that single intake was all the confirmation I needed. She tried to pivot hard into mock offense, like I was the one who had done something wrong. "Are you serious right now?" she demanded, her voice getting louder. "You're tracking me?" "I didn't need to," I replied calmly. "You're sloppy. You parked 2 blocks from where you said you'd be and walked around the back of the building with a man who's been calling you every night for weeks. Are you going through my phone now?" Her voice was getting more defensive by the second, but I could see the cracks widening in her composure. "Nope. Just read what popped up while you were upstairs humming to yourself," I said. That's when the entire atmosphere in the room changed. Her mouth opened like she had some carefully rehearsed monologue ready to deploy, but instead of launching into her prepared lies, she made a critical mistake. She smirked. "Okay," she said, her tone dipping cold like someone had just flipped off a switch. "So what? You're suddenly the victim here? Like you didn't leave me alone in this marriage? Like I wasn't drowning for years while you buried yourself in work and gadgets and God knows what else?" There it was, her ace in the hole. The blame deflection delivered so fast it could give you whiplash. I didn't flinch because I had expected exactly that card to be played. "You don't get to act like the wounded hero now," she continued, her voice gaining momentum. "You made me feel invisible for so long, Nathan. I tried, I really did. But you were never here, not really. And Tyler, he made me feel like I mattered again." She said his name out loud, like she wanted to wound me with it, like she was proud of what she'd done. It worked, but not in the way she expected. I just stared at her, because that was the moment everything solidified for me. Not just the affair itself, not just Tyler's existence in our marriage, but who Victoria really was at her core. She was a woman who had chosen betrayal as her solution, then tried to wear it like armor when confronted. She was someone who couldn't own her choices without lashing out at mine. Someone who would rather burn down everything we'd built than take responsibility for her actions. "You matter," I said, my voice steady and deliberate. "Victoria, you matter so much that I've been fighting for this marriage alone while you were playing house with a gym rat." Now she looked genuinely cornered for the first time since this conversation began. For just a flicker of a second, I saw something cross her face that might have been shame, but she buried it quickly and wrapped herself in cruelty instead. "You want to leave?" she said, her voice turning hard now, her lips pressed into a tight line. "Do it! You're not some great prize, Nathan. You think I was the only one drifting? Please! You stopped being a husband a long time ago." I didn't say a word in response. I just stood there and let her reveal exactly who she was beneath all the pretense. She stepped closer to me, close enough that I could smell that jasmine perfume that had become the scent of deception. You want out? Then get out. But don't pretend you're a saint here. You never saw me, not once. With that declaration, she turned her back on me, poured herself another glass of wine, and walked into the living room like she hadn't just detonated 10 years of shared life with a few carefully chosen words. She moved with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the cards, someone who thought she could rewrite history to make herself the victim and me the villain. I stood in that kitchen, letting the silence settle around me, feeling the cold reality of what had just happened hit me like a physical blow. The house felt different now. Smaller, emptier, even though Victoria was still in it, probably sitting on our couch sipping wine like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with, had just shown me exactly who she really was when backed into a corner. I didn't pack that night, but I didn't sleep either. I couldn't bring myself to lie down next to someone who had just made it crystal clear that she saw our entire marriage as my failure rather than her betrayal. Instead, I sat in our bedroom chair, staring at the ceiling and planning my exit strategy, because one thing had become absolutely certain. Come morning, I wasn't going to be living in this house anymore. The morning came slowly and deliberately, like time was giving me one final warning before everything tipped over the edge into a new reality I couldn't take back. I moved through the house like it wasn't mine anymore, like I was borrowing time in a place already full of ghosts and broken promises. Victoria was still asleep when I started gathering my things, sprawled deep in sleep across our bed, like she hadn't thrown a grenade into our marriage the night before. Her robe was half open, her mouth slightly parted, and there were absolutely no traces of guilt or worry on her face. Just peace. The kind of deep, untroubled peace that doesn't come from reconciliation or resolution. This was the peace that comes from complete detachment, from someone who had already emotionally left the building long before the conversation ever happened. She was already gone, and maybe she had been gone for a long time. I was just the last one to figure it out. I took a shower, got dressed, and packed 2 duffel bags with just the essentials. Clothes, my laptop, a few important files from the home office, and a small envelope containing copies of bank records I had printed out 2 days earlier when I first started putting the pieces together. I didn't slam drawers or make a scene. The only sound was the quiet buzz of zippers sliding closed on the remnants of my life in this house. At exactly 7:42 a.m., I walked out the front door for the last time. I didn't look back. Didn't take one final glance at the place where I'd thought I was building a future with someone who turned out to be a stranger. I didn't go to my brother's house, and I didn't call any friends. Instead, I booked a room at a mid-range hotel across town. The kind of place with paper-thin walls and no view, where people stay when they're between lives and don't know what comes next. The bed was stiff. The air conditioner clicked like it had a secret to tell, and I sat on the edge of that unfamiliar mattress holding my phone, knowing my lawyer was expecting my call at 9 a.m. I had my notes ready, facts, dates, call logs, text timestamps, a comprehensive list of our shared assets, and even Tyler Knox's name along with the address of his apartment and the gym where he worked. My friend in private security had been thorough. I even had screenshots from GPS logs that showed exactly where Victoria had been when she claimed to be somewhere else. But before I made that call that would officially end my marriage, I found myself scrolling through our wedding photos on my phone. I know I shouldn't have done it, but I needed to see her face one more time. The version of Victoria from before she learned how to lie with such practiced ease. There she was in those pictures, under strings of garden lights, laughing into a wine glass on the dock in late summer. Her hand was on my chest, her mouth near my ear, and I could see it clearly in those frozen moments. There had been love there once. Real, raw, maybe even deep love. But looking at those photos now, I understood something that cut deeper than the affair itself. Love without loyalty isn't actually love at all. It's just theater, a performance with a trapdoor waiting to open beneath your feet when the audience gets bored. I made the call at exactly 9 a.m., my voice steady and resolved. Proceed with the filing, I told my lawyer. I want a clean split, no drama, but I'm not walking away with nothing. I have documentation for everything. My lawyer was calm and professional, exactly what I needed in that moment. He explained that we'd start with a notice of intent to separate and that he'd have the first set of documents drawn up by the end of the day. He advised me to stay put for now and to avoid any contact with Victoria unless it was in writing and documented. I agreed to everything without hesitation. At 11:16 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Where are you? Not funny. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deliberately chose not to respond. At 12:03, she called. I watched her name light up the screen. It still read Vicky with a heart emoji, a relic from better times that I hadn't bothered to change. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. She called again and again, each call more insistent than the last. Then came the flood of texts, each one revealing more about her state of mind. Nathan, what is going on? Did you seriously leave? Can you grow up and talk to me? You're acting insane. The final text cut the deepest, not because it was cruel, but because it showed how completely she misunderstood what was happening. Call me tomorrow. She didn't realize that I had already burned the bridge she was trying to walk back across. She was still operating under the assumption that this was some kind of marital spat that could be smoothed over with the right words or the right approach. She had no idea that I had already moved past the point of reconciliation and into the realm of legal proceedings. By 2 p.m., I had an email from my lawyer confirming that the process had been officially initiated. The wheels were turning, the paperwork was filed, and there was no more pretending that our marriage was something that could be salvaged. No more slow poison being administered behind closed doors, no more wondering when the next lie would surface. But here's the part I didn't expect. At 3:47 p.m., there was a knock on my hotel room door. It wasn't room service or housekeeping. It was Victoria. I stood perfectly still as the knocking echoed through the small room. 3 short, deliberate taps followed by silence. I didn't need to check the peephole to know it was her. There was a different kind of weight behind the sound when it came from someone who had betrayed you. It landed heavier, carried more significance, like each knock was loaded with everything that had gone wrong between us. For a moment, I considered not answering at all, just letting her knock until she gave up and went home to sit with the silence she had created. But something in me shifted. Not curiosity, but a desire for control. I wanted to see what version of Victoria would show up at that door now that the performance was over and the audience had left the theater. I opened the door to find Victoria standing there in black leggings and a denim jacket thrown over a tank top. Her sunglasses were pushed up onto her head. She wore no makeup, and her eyes were puffy. Maybe from crying. Maybe from not sleeping. Her mouth was pressed into a thin, determined line, but what struck me most was her stance. She wasn't contrite or apologetic. She was defiant, like she was the one who had been wronged. "So this is where you're hiding," she said, her tone casual like we were old roommates playing some kind of game of tag. I stepped aside without saying a word, and she walked into my hotel room like she still had the right to be anywhere I was. The door shut behind her with a soft click, and immediately the air between us turned to static electricity, charged with everything we weren't saying. She turned to face me, crossing her arms defensively. "You seriously left without even trying to talk to me?" "I tried," I said flatly, keeping my voice level. "You just weren't listening." "That's not fair," she replied, moving closer with her voice softening in that practiced way I'd seen her use in arguments before. "You blindsided me, Nathan. I woke up this morning and thought maybe you were at the gym or grabbing coffee. Instead, I get ghosted like some one-night stand." I almost laughed at the irony. She wanted to talk about being ghosted when she'd been disappearing for months, just without taking her physical body with her. "You've been disappearing for months," I told her. "The only difference is I didn't take my body with me when I checked out." She flinched at that, but recovered quickly. "So this is it," she said, her voice taking on a tone of disbelief. "You're really going to throw away 10 years because I made a mistake?" "A mistake is tripping over your words or forgetting someone's birthday," I replied, stepping toward her now. "You planned this, Victoria. You hit it. You had options at every step, and you chose him over and over again." Her face twisted, but not into shame like I might have expected. Instead, it contorted into anger, like I was the one being unreasonable. "I needed something, Nathan," she said, her voice rising. "I was lonely. I was exhausted. I was tired of begging for your attention. You think this was easy for me?" "You didn't beg," I said, stepping even closer. "You lied. You lied with your mouth, your eyes, your body. You built an entire second life and tried to keep one toe in this one so you wouldn't lose your safety net." She swallowed hard, and for a moment I thought she might actually acknowledge what she'd done. "It wasn't just about him," she said. "It was about me too." I felt seen again. I nodded slowly. "And now I see you too, fully." That's when her carefully constructed mask finally cracked completely. Her voice rose to a level I rarely heard from her, sharp and cutting. "So what? You're perfect? You think you never made mistakes? You think I didn't cry myself to sleep for months while you were buried in your work? barely even looking at me? That's not justification, I replied calmly. That's setup. You chose not to tell me you were unhappy. You chose to find validation in another man instead of talking to your husband. You don't get to rewrite that history now. Victoria stepped back like I had physically slapped her, but there were no tears, no emotional breakdown. Just that familiar coldness settling over her features like armor. She let out a short, bitter breath. Fine, she said, her voice flat and final. If you want a divorce, let's do it. But don't expect me to play the villain in your little martyr story. You already wrote yourself into that role, I replied. There was a heavy silence that felt final, like the last page of a book being turned. Then she looked around my modest hotel room, taking in the generic furniture and the small microwave on the counter. She gave a bitter half laugh that held no humor whatsoever. Wow, she said, shaking her head. Motel furniture and a microwave. That's what freedom looks like, huh? I picked up the key card from the nightstand, holding it between my fingers like a talisman. No, I said, meeting her eyes directly. This is what dignity looks like. She stared at me for 1 second longer, something unreadable flickering across her face, then walked out of the room without another word. I didn't watch her leave through the window, didn't need to see her car pull away. The conversation was over, and so were we. It took exactly 36 hours for the real storm to hit. After Victoria left my hotel room, I had genuinely believed that confrontation was the final blow, the clean break that would allow us both to move forward separately. I truly thought we had severed 10 years of tangled history in one bitter, unforgettable hour. But Victoria had never been someone who went out quietly, and I was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The next day, I received a call from our joint bank that made my blood run cold. Hi, Mr. Carson, the customer service representative said, in that artificially cheerful voice they use for delivering bad news. We noticed some unusual activity on your account. Unusual was certainly one word for it. Victoria had transferred $14,000 from our shared savings account into a separate checking account that she had just opened in her name only. The move wasn't technically illegal yet, since we were still legally married, but it was calculated, fast, and cold. Like she had been planning this financial strike for a while and was just waiting for the right moment to execute it. I didn't panic when I got that call from the bank. Instead, I immediately called my lawyer and updated him on Victoria's financial maneuver. He filed a motion to freeze all non-essential joint accounts until the divorce terms could be properly settled. She had made the first financial strike in what was clearly going to be a war, and I had just made the next legal move to protect myself. But the money grab was just the beginning. It didn't stop there, not by a long shot. That evening, I received a text from my mother that made my stomach drop. Nathan, why is Victoria saying you abandoned her? The next message came from my sister. Did you really walk out without explaining anything? She's devastated. Then my friend Tony chimed in. Bro, she's saying you've been emotionally cheating for a year. That true? I stared at my phone screen as one text after another came flooding in, each one carrying a different twisted version of our story. Victoria was already in full damage control mode, rebuilding her public image brick by brick and using me as the cracked foundation to build her new narrative on. The woman who had smirked at me in my hotel room, who had proudly mentioned Tyler's name like a weapon, who had called me invisible and walked out like she was the winner, was now painting herself as the victim of my supposed emotional abandonment. She was spinning the story so fast it could give you whiplash. Her social media campaign was particularly sophisticated. She started posting cryptic messages in elegant fonts. Sometimes the one you trust most is the one who breaks you deepest. She shared photos of herself smiling with friends, wine glass in hand, with captions like, "Healing isn't linear, but it's honest." Every post was carefully crafted to frame her as the wounded party finally finding her strength after being destroyed by her heartless husband. She was rewriting history in real time, and she was good at it. But I didn't respond to any of it. I didn't comment on her posts, didn't defend myself to friends and family, didn't try to set the record straight. Instead, I quietly and methodically documented every message, every social media post, every account withdrawal, every date, every lie. I was letting her build her case in the court of public opinion while I built mine in actual court. Then came the letter, 3 pages of handwritten text delivered to my hotel's front desk in a cream-colored envelope with my name written in her careful cursive. Inside was Victoria's final attempt to rewrite our entire history in ink. The letter started with guilt. You were my world once. Then it moved into justification. You stopped seeing me, Nathan. I had to survive somehow. Finally, it descended into pure manipulation. If you go through with this, just know it will destroy me. Tyler isn't even in my life anymore. It was never about him. That last line sat there like a cruel joke. She expected me to believe that she had burned down our marriage for someone who didn't even matter, like I was supposed to find comfort in the idea that our decade together had been sacrificed for nothing more than a meaningless fling. But what really stunned me wasn't the lies themselves. It was how she signed the letter. She didn't sign it Victoria or even your wife. She signed it, the woman you gave up on. No apology, no ownership, no acknowledgement of what she had actually done. Just one final accusation written in cursive, blaming me for giving up on someone who had already checked out months ago. I didn't write back to her letter. Instead, I forwarded it directly to my lawyer as additional evidence of her inability to take responsibility for her actions. Then I made another significant decision. I moved out of the hotel entirely. I didn't go back to our house because that place wasn't mine anymore in any meaningful way. Instead, I rented a short-term apartment downtown, a clean slate with no memories attached to it, no shared drawers full of tangled histories, no photographs on the walls of happier times. Just 4 walls and a key that fit only my hand. I didn't expect peace from this move. I knew Victoria well enough to anticipate retaliation, noise, and probably some crocodile tears designed for her growing audience of supporters. But what she did next wasn't just another slap in the face. It was a precision strike, carefully calculated to humiliate me rather than simply wound me. 2 weeks after her handwritten letter had arrived, after the silence of legal filings and my quiet move into the downtown apartment, I got tagged in a post on Facebook. The notification wasn't from Victoria herself, but from Tyler Knox. His account had been set to private, but this particular post was deliberately made public, and I knew immediately that it was meant for me to see. It was a photograph that made my stomach turn. Victoria was sitting in Tyler's lap, laughing with her legs curled under her like a schoolgirl. His muscular arm was wrapped possessively around her waist, and there were wine glasses visible in the background of what looked distinctly like the rooftop patio at their gym. The caption read, "Sometimes you don't find your person until you're finally honest with yourself." The comments section flooded immediately with congratulations from friends of his, some friends of hers, and mutual acquaintances I barely recognized anymore. "You two look amazing together. So happy for you both. You deserve this." And the one that stung more than I wanted to admit. Real love wins. Victoria hadn't just moved on from our marriage. She had completely rewritten the entire script of our relationship. She wasn't a cheating wife anymore in this new narrative. She was a brave soul who had chosen to be honest with herself, who had found real love and courageously walked away from an emotionally distant husband who had failed to see her light. In this version of events, I was the invisible villain, the gray space in her inspiring story of self-discovery and authentic love. That same day, my lawyer sent me a draft proposal from Victoria's legal team that made my jaw clench so tightly I could hear my molars grinding together. She wanted the house and all the furniture. She was demanding spousal support for 5 years. She even had the audacity to request half of my business's passive revenue, claiming that her emotional contribution to my professional success entitled her to ongoing financial compensation. I read through the document in complete silence, feeling my anger crystallize into something cold and hard. She wasn't just done pretending to be sorry. She was ready to take everything she hadn't earned and smile while doing it. I called my lawyer immediately after reading Victoria's outrageous demands. "No negotiation," I said, my voice steady but firm. "We go full defense mode. I want every receipt, every message, every timestamp documented to the letter. Drag out everything we have." He agreed without hesitation, understanding that we were now in a battle that required comprehensive documentation and strategic precision. But even with the legal machinery grinding forward to protect my interests, what haunted me during those dark nights wasn't the money or even her public lies. It was the devastating realization of how quickly someone I had loved completely could transform into someone I'd never even met. The same woman who used to fall asleep on my chest after watching long movies together, who used to steal fries from my plate when she claimed she wasn't hungry, who once cried in our car on our 2nd anniversary because she said she didn't deserve to be loved that much. That woman was now posting celebration photos like I had never existed in her life at all. Somewhere deep in my gut, I realized that she had probably been practicing this exit strategy for months, maybe even longer than I wanted to acknowledge. This wasn't betrayal born from impulse or a moment of weakness. This was betrayal by design, carefully planned and methodically executed. I had been the final scene in her old script, and Tyler was her dramatic curtain call for the new life she was writing for herself. When we finally got to court, the experience was nothing like the dramatic legal thrillers you see in movies. There were no shouting matches, no gavel-slamming moments, no one jumping up to yell "objection" like we were in some courtroom drama. Instead, it was cold, dry, and clinical. A gray room with beige walls and rows of uncomfortable benches that made even the strongest backache after 20 minutes of sitting. Victoria sat across from me at the petitioner's table, perfectly composed and dressed like she was attending a funeral. Her hair was pinned back in a severe style. She wore a conservative black dress, and her makeup was subtle but flawless. The complete aesthetic of a grieving wife, dialed in with precision that would have impressed a theater director. Her lawyer, a tall man in a navy suit with the practiced smirk of someone who had dismantled marriages too many times to count, sat beside her flipping through notes like we were about to debate parking violations rather than the complete demolition of a decade-long marriage. I wore a navy suit too, but no tie. I wanted to look put together and professional, but not like I was the one on trial for something I hadn't done. The judge asked procedural questions. My lawyer provided clear answers. Victoria's lawyer countered with their prepared responses. Then came the financial disclosures, joint accounts, property values, asset listings. And then Victoria's legal team introduced what they labeled as her non-financial contributions to our marriage. The implication was clear. Victoria had invested emotionally in my business success, had supported me through late nights and stressful periods, had encouraged my professional growth and made personal sacrifices that entitled her to a percentage of my company's value. That's when I handed over the flash drive that contained months of carefully compiled evidence. The flash drive contained emails, calendar entries, and a comprehensive spreadsheet documenting every weekend over the past 9 months when Victoria had claimed to be working late on campaigns. Each alleged work session was cross-referenced with gym attendance logs, GPS data, and timestamps from her second phone number's call records that my private security friend had helped me compile. This wasn't just about proving the affair existed. Anyone could see that from the evidence we'd already presented. This was about systematically disproving her claim that she had contributed meaningfully to my business success. The data showed clearly that Victoria hadn't been building my company or supporting my professional growth. She had been completely checked out of our shared life long before Tyler entered the picture, pursuing her own interests while I worked to maintain what I thought was our partnership. When the evidence was formally entered into the court record, Victoria's face barely changed. Her composure remained intact, except for a slight tightening of her jaw and a single blink that lasted just a fraction too long. But behind that carefully maintained exterior, I could see the moment of realization hitting her. She hadn't expected such a comprehensive paper trail of her deception. Her lawyer leaned over to whisper something in her ear, and I watched her lips flatten into an even thinner line as the reality of her situation began to sink in. Then came the cross-examination, and my lawyer was careful, respectful, and devastatingly direct in his approach. "Mrs. Carson," he began, consulting his notes. "On the following dates that I'm about to read, you stated to your husband that you were working overnight on marketing campaigns. Would you agree with that characterization?" Victoria nodded stiffly. "Yes. Can you then explain to the court why your location data places you at 428 Ocean Drive, which is the residential address of Mr. Tyler Knox, on those same evenings when you claimed to be working?" She hesitated for several long seconds, clearly trying to formulate a response that wouldn't completely destroy what remained of her credibility. "I was visiting a friend," she finally said. My lawyer raised an eyebrow with practiced skepticism. "Multiple times a week for 3 months? That's quite a lot of friendly visits." The silence that followed was deafening. The judge tilted his head slightly, clearly waiting for a more substantial explanation. "Then would you consider those frequent visits to Mr. Knox's residence to be a form of marital contribution to the respondent's company?" My lawyer continued. Victoria's lawyer objected immediately, but the judge overruled him without hesitation. Victoria didn't answer the question. She couldn't answer it without admitting that her entire financial claim was built on a foundation of lies. Her jaw tightened again, and I could see the careful framing of herself as the wounded party starting to blur and fade like an overexposed photograph. We broke for lunch, and as Victoria passed by me in the courthouse hallway, her eyes were cold and her lips were pursed into a tight line of barely controlled fury. Then she said something just loud enough for me to hear. "You think this makes you better than me?" I didn't flinch or react emotionally. "No," I replied calmly. "It just makes me free." She stared at me for a long beat, something flickering in her eyes. anger, maybe regret, or maybe just the dawning realization that her carefully constructed narrative was slipping through her fingers like sand. She walked away without saying another word. That afternoon, the judge rendered his decisions with the clinical efficiency of someone who had presided over countless similar cases. He denied Victoria's request for a percentage of my business entirely. He ordered our house to be sold with the proceeds split equally between us. Most importantly, he denied her demand for spousal support and alimony, citing the evidence of her infidelity and the lack of genuine contribution to our shared financial success. The courtroom emptied out like nothing significant had just happened, like we hadn't just legally dismantled 10 years of shared life in a sterile government building. Victoria didn't look at me even once more before she left through those double doors. But I watched her walk out in complete silence, not because I wanted to see her go, but because I needed to remember this moment. I needed to cement in my memory that even the most beautiful lies eventually get walked out on. And that truth has a way of surfacing no matter how deeply someone tries to bury it. The first morning I woke up alone in my new downtown apartment felt like standing in the center of a long-forgotten cathedral. There were echoes of something that had once been sacred, but no God left inside the walls. Everything was blank. No photographs, no decorations, no shared memories cluttering the surfaces. Just the steady hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak from the building's old pipes. I made coffee in complete silence. There was no second mug sitting on the counter. No half-hearted morning kiss from someone who was already halfway out the door mentally. And yet, there was a strange kind of peace in that absence. It was the peace that comes from no longer having to perform, no longer having to pretend that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I stopped checking Victoria's social media entirely. I had blocked Tyler months ago, muted all our mutual friends, and essentially unsubscribed from their carefully crafted narratives about love and authenticity. The courtroom proceedings hadn't given me closure in any dramatic sense, but they had given me something more valuable: distance. Legal, emotional, and physical distance from a situation that had been slowly poisoning my life for months. The world kept spinning without missing a beat. My business remained steady, my inbox stayed full of client work, and life didn't collapse the way I had feared it might. It just stopped pretending to be something it wasn't. The relief was almost overwhelming, but there were still moments that hit harder than I expected. The first time I saw our old house listed on a real estate website was particularly brutal. The same living room where we used to dance to music from her phone was now staged with fake plants and someone else's furniture. The listing description mentioned square footage and natural light, but it didn't note the faint crack in the kitchen tile where Victoria had dropped a wine glass during our third major fight. It didn't mention the patch of wall we had painted together in the middle of the night because we were bored and laughing and thought we had forever to make more memories like that. I didn't cry when I saw that listing, but something behind my ribs tightened like a thread being pulled taut. It was the physical manifestation of saying goodbye to a version of myself that had believed in permanence, in the idea that love could conquer anything if you just tried hard enough. A few days later, I ran into Claire near a bookstore on 4th Street, the same Claire who had served as Victoria's alibi throughout the entire affair. She saw me browsing near the entrance and paused, looking uncertain about whether she should approach or pretend she hadn't seen me. After a moment of visible internal debate, she decided to speak. "Hey, Nathan," she said, her voice tentative. "Claire," I nodded, keeping my voice even and neutral. She hesitated, then stepped closer with the careful movements of someone walking through a minefield. "I just wanted to say that I didn't know the whole story when everything was happening. I mean, she told me some things, but not all of it. I found out about Tyler much later than I should have." I stayed silent, letting her continue without offering any help or judgment. "She made me swear not to tell anyone anything," Claire went on, the words tumbling out like she'd been holding them back for months. "She said it was temporary, that she just needed time to think through her marriage and figure out what she really wanted." "And was she thinking in his bed or in the back of his car?" I asked. The question wasn't cruel. It was clean, direct, cutting through the euphemisms and self-deception. Claire sighed heavily, her shoulders sagging with what looked like genuine regret. "I'm sorry, Nathan. I know it doesn't mean much now, but I should have said something to you. I should have refused to be part of it." I nodded again. "We all make choices," I said simply. We parted ways without saying anything more, both of us understanding that some bridges can't be rebuilt once they've been burned. That night, I finally opened the last box I had been avoiding since I moved out of the house we'd shared. It was packed full of anniversary cards, movie ticket stubs, and little souvenirs from trips we had taken over the years. quiet artifacts of a life that had once felt permanent and unshakable. There were handwritten notes from birthdays, restaurant coasters from special dinners, even the cork from the bottle of wine we'd opened on our first Valentine's Day as a married couple. I didn't burn them and I didn't throw them out immediately. Instead, I packed everything back up carefully, sealed the lid tight, and slid the entire box under my bed. Not because I wanted to keep dwelling on those memories, but because I wasn't ready to pretend they had never existed. Those moments had been real, even if they hadn't been as permanent as I'd believed at the time. What I was learning about healing is that it isn't like a movie montage where sad music plays while you work out and eventually find new love that fixes everything the last relationship broke. Real healing is much quieter and more mundane than that. It's a Tuesday night where you brush your teeth without thinking about her name. It's eating dinner alone and not feeling the compulsive urge to text someone a picture of your plate. It's a Sunday morning where silence is just silence, not some form of punishment or emptiness you need to fill with distractions. I wasn't completely whole yet. That would take more time than I'd initially expected. But I was no longer bleeding from fresh wounds every day, and that felt like genuine progress. The end of my marriage didn't come with fire and drama like I might have expected. Instead, it ended with something much more powerful and final: complete indifference. A few months after the divorce was finalized, I saw Victoria again purely by chance at a downtown street fair of all places. I was browsing through a used bookstore, lost in thought while flipping through novels I might never read, when I caught a flash of familiar hair in my peripheral vision. Something made me look up, and there she was, holding a smoothie and laughing at something Tyler said. He was standing next to her wearing sunglasses and that smugly confident look of someone who always seemed like he had just walked out of a reality show audition. They looked comfortable together, settled into their new normal with the easy intimacy of people who had been together much longer than they actually had. Victoria didn't see me, or if she did, she didn't acknowledge it in any way. I watched them for exactly 3 seconds, taking in this snapshot of her new life. Then I turned back to the books I had been examining. There was no rage, no sudden spike of sadness, no wave of regret washing over me. My breathing stayed steady and full, and there was a quiet voice in my head that simply said, "You made it out." I didn't tell anyone about that encounter. I didn't text a friend or write about it in any journal, because by then, Victoria wasn't the villain of my story anymore. She had become something much less significant, just a chapter I had already closed and moved beyond. In the months that followed that chance encounter, things didn't magically transform into some perfect new existence, but they did get progressively more real. I took my first solo weekend trip in years, driving up the coast with no itinerary and no one to check in with. I started cooking more elaborate meals for myself instead of surviving on takeout and microwave dinners. I began jogging again in the early mornings, something I had abandoned during the last stressful years of our marriage. I rebuilt my client list with more intentional choices, focusing on projects that actually interested me rather than just taking whatever paid the bills. Most importantly, I started going to therapy, not because I was broken or unable to function, but because I didn't want to carry any more emotional weight than I absolutely had to. Slowly, piece by piece, I started choosing myself again in ways I hadn't realized I had stopped doing. I stopped asking myself how Victoria could have lied so skillfully and with such apparent ease. I stopped trying to find some deeper meaning in every small betrayal she had committed. I stopped replaying that night when she said, "Call me tomorrow," like it was some final puzzle piece that would make everything make sense if I could just decode it properly. Here's a truth that no one likes to acknowledge out loud. Not every betrayal comes with warning signs that are obvious in hindsight. Not every liar stutters or avoids eye contact or gives themselves away with nervous tics. Some betrayals are clean, quiet, and dressed up in genuine smiles and affectionate gestures. But that doesn't make you stupid for believing in them. It makes you human. We believe in people because we love them. We trust because we make a conscious choice to be vulnerable with someone we think deserves that trust. And when that trust gets broken, when someone weaponizes the love you gave them freely, it's not a reflection of your weakness or naivety. It's their signature on the destruction they chose to create. So here's my advice to anyone who might be reading this and recognizing their own situation. If you feel it in your gut, don't wait for the feeling to burn your entire life down before you act on it. Trust that instinct even when your rational mind is trying to explain away the red flags. If you find yourself dimming your own light just to avoid seeing the cracks in your relationship more clearly, flip the switch anyway. You deserve to see the truth of your situation, even when that truth is painful. If someone you love says, "Call me tomorrow," and something deep in your soul shifts or feels wrong about those words. Listen to that feeling. Your intuition is usually picking up on things your conscious mind hasn't fully processed yet. And if you do decide that you need to walk away from someone who has betrayed your trust, walk all the way. Don't look back hoping for apologies that will never come. Don't wait around for them to transform into the person they pretended to be when they wanted to keep you hooked. Don't hand them a pen and ask them to rewrite your worth or redefine your value. Because here's what I learned about healing. It isn't loud or dramatic. Healing happens in quiet moments like the one I'm experiencing right now, sitting here writing this with a cup of coffee in my hand and sunlight streaming across my apartment floor. There are no ghosts left in my chest, no phantom pain from wounds that have finally closed completely. Victoria is someone else's problem now, someone else's challenge to navigate. I am no one's fool anymore, and that realization brings a peace I didn't know I was capable of feeling. And finally, after everything I went through, the discovery, the confrontation, the legal battles, the public humiliation, the financial warfare, and the long process of rebuilding my sense of self, I can say with complete certainty that I am exactly where I need to be. I am free. I am whole. I am finally, completely myself again. The end. What do you think? Have you ever been in a situation where someone close to you completely rewrote the narrative of your relationship to make themselves look like the victim? How did you handle it?